All right, guys, we hear from people all the time who are thinking about moving to the Oregon coast that they would prefer to, or at least would be willing to, live a little bit inland. So in this video, we're going to take a look at what the options would be if you were going to be 5, 10, 15 miles inland. All that starts now. Hey, what's up everybody? This is Clem with the Home Team Brokers coming to you from the Oregon coast. And in this video, we're going to look at some of the communities a little bit inland from the true coastal communities up and down the Oregon coast. So there's really not that many options. I mean, it's kind of few and far between unless you wanted to be really, really rural. So we're going to look from north to south at what some of these communities look like, what it's going to be like living there, and take a look at some photos. Take a look at the aerial view from Google Maps. In a perfect world, I would have a ton of footage from all of these communities. It can be pretty difficult to get up and down the coast, and especially to get into some of these communities. There's a lot of winding and weaving, up the coastal range into some of these communities. So that would be very labor intensive. I think over time we will accumulate more and more footage of these towns. Some of these areas we've helped people purchase homes in, other areas we have not. So let's switch over to my map view and let's take a look. Okay, so a little bit of rapid fire here. Again, we're just going to be looking at a map primarily just to give you a little bit of context around what it might look like if you were considering living inland from the coast, not necessarily in the Willamette Valley, but inland from a coastal community. So the biggest distinction there, if you look at this I-5 corridor in Oregon, this is Western Oregon. This is where most people live in Oregon, primarily this Willamette Valley here. So from Portland down to Salem, down to Albany, Corvallis, down to Eugene. West of this I-5 corridor, you have this coastal range. So all up and down Oregon, you have this coastal range here, and then you get up the mountain and down over to the coast, over to Highway 101, where all of the Oregon coast towns are. Some towns are right on 101, some towns are a little bit off 101, but basically this 101 corridor is where you're going to find these coastal communities in Oregon. So up east from some of these coastal communities, you do get some communities that are a little bit inland. So again, we're not talking about 50, 60, 70 miles inland up over into the valley or this I-5 corridor, but more so within a 5, 10, 15 mile stretch or distance from the beach, from the nearest town that's actually on the Oregon coast. So starting up north, we have Astoria, which is a very popular community. A lot of people really like Astoria for its historical charm. It has a little bit of a busier, bustling feel. You can see it's really dense. This little downtown area really kind of feels a little bit more urban, definitely the most urban setting on the Oregon coast. And you're actually not right on the beach, something we talk about in a lot of videos. You are on the Columbia River here, but it's still a beautiful area surrounded by water, definitely unique for the Oregon coast. I think the only other area that I could compare to Astoria would be Coos Bay, North Bend, but we're talking about areas inland from coastal communities. So Astoria, definitely considered a coastal community in Oregon. And if you just go east on Highway 30 here, you're going to get into Napa, Svensson, these areas in here, and you can see pretty rural setting. There are some little developments, but overall very small, where you get in here and some of these lots are quarter acre, third of an acre, and then you have some areas where you can get more property, a little more flat out here, so you're not quite up the coastal range yet, you're just following the Columbia River. Overall, again, pretty rural feeling community, but you do get at least a few hundred homes in this area. This is going to be about 15, 20 minutes, maybe 10, 12, 15 minutes into Astoria. You could be 25, 30 minutes to the beach living out in this area. And you can see, if we just take a look at some photos, we're just going to rely on Google Photos here. You're right on the Columbia River. So you do have some beautiful water views. It's definitely a unique landscape in terms of what you get overall. And this is an area that, you know, we've worked with folks who like Astoria, like this region, who are drawn to this area a little bit inland along Highway 30. You'll see that it's pretty consistent too with most of these communities, that you are going out one of these major corridors from Western Oregon that lead from, you know, say this I-5 corridor west out to the 101 corridor. There's a handful of these highways, and almost all of them have some type of community just a little bit inland. So for Astoria, you're looking at Napa, Svensson, again, pretty rural living, but still pretty close to Astoria, and pretty spread out too. So some of the communities we'll look at are a little more dense and true towns, where this area doesn't really have like a main street or downtown area. Okay, next we'll look at, we have to go all the way down to around Pacific City, south of Tillamook, to see the next option. So what that means is, when you come down south of Astoria, you look at like Gearhart, Seaside, Cannon Beach, Highway 26. This is kind of the most direct shot from Portland. Very popular towns in here for people to travel out to from Portland. And along Highway 26, you're not really going to get much of anything. I mean, you see some little unincorporated communities. Like, I couldn't tell you what Mishawaka is necessarily, or Nicanicum. I mean, there's the Nicanicum River, you know, that follows the highway here. But there are some properties. There are some very rural areas, you know, and some homes along this corridor, but not really many at all. So you continue south. You do get to like Manzanita, and then Nehalem, Wheeler. You can see these communities are on the Nehalem Bay. So that, you know, you could call them inland, but you're on the water. You know, they're still going to feel like beach towns. So we're talking about really towns that are actually a significant distance east, where you're not really on the beach, where you're not really going to feel like you're at the ocean necessarily. Again, Nehalem, Wheeler, and some other bay towns like Garibaldi, Bay City, you know, you have this big body of water, you know, that's saltwater, you know, where you have fishing and crabbing and all that good stuff. Again, you really feel like you're in a coastal community along these bay towns. Tillamook, even still a little bit inland, but you have the Tillamook Bay, and just west of here you have Oceanside and Neathart. So we're going to leave Tillamook off of this list. Tillamook really is, by and large, a coastal community when you look at the Oregon coast. So the next area we're going to talk about is when you actually really start to get south of Tillamook. You can see 101, how far it breaks off of the coastal or the coastline and goes inland, where you have the coastal range in here, and you have some like really narrow valleys and things like that in here. It's really a beautiful area. You start with Beaver. You can see, we give you a little bit of an idea here where, you know, you have a little bit of a main street along 101, the gas station, you know, some homes in town, still a very pretty rural community. You have the Nestucca River coming through this whole area, really. You do have some rolling hills. Again, it's really pretty beautiful landscape. See if we can get some photos here. So this is Beaver. This gives you an idea of what the landscape looks like. You can see the ocean's way out here, Highway 101, quite a bit inland. A lot of wildlife, no doubt. Homes on the river. Beautiful area. And you'll see a lot of consistency between Beaver, Hebo, and Cloverdale. So this little corridor, this little stretch of 101 in here that is more inland. Hebo, again, it's going to look pretty similar to Beaver, just to the north. Luckily, some people take nice photos. Yeah, just to give you an idea of what you're looking at. Small town living for sure, if not a very rural feel. Still relatively easy access to the ocean and to beaches. But living in these communities, you're not really going to feel like you're at the ocean. Again, you have the Nestucca River running through this corridor here. Let's see if we can get some pictures of Cloverdale too. Great football field for the high school there. See, all kind of looks the same throughout this stretch. But again, beautiful landscape. You can get out to the beaches, especially once you get to Cloverdale. You start to get pretty close back to kind of, looping back to the coastline. And from Cloverdale, you can get over into Pacific City, which is, definitely one of the more popular little coastal communities on the Oregon coast. Very popular town for like second homes, vacation rentals, things like that. Pacific City's awesome. We've talked about that in a lot of other videos. So this stretch south of Tillamook, Beaver, Hebo, Cloverdale, those are going to be some options if you're looking at potentially living a little bit inland, but wanting to be, more or less near the ocean and having ocean access. Okay, next we'll talk about Otis. So Otis is here north of Lincoln City and just a little bit east, a little bit is inland. So you also have Rose Lodge here. So these are two little areas. This stretch of Highway 18, which Highway 18 is what takes you out to Lincoln City if you're coming from Portland. You can see there's kind of this triangle here from Portland, up 26 to Seaside, down 101 to Lincoln City, and then back up to Portland through Highway 18. You go through like McMinnville and this wine country corridor here, which is really nice. So getting south of Pacific City, we were just talking about this area in here. You get into Otis, and there is a little community in here in Otis and Rose Lodge, where you do have some residential development. It is actually like a neighborhood and a community. It's not super rural in that way where, every house is 5 acres or 15 acres or whatever it may be. So there is some of that residential development in here. You're really kind of up in the mountains. You can see how wooded it is. It's going to be a different feel being out here in Otis and Rose Lodge than it is going to be just to the south and to the west when you get into Lincoln City, and you can see how big and dense Lincoln City is, compared to just being a little bit inland. You also have Devil's Lake separating this Otis area and Lincoln City, so there's residential development all around the lake here, but you're really kind of in town unless you're on the east side of the lake here. You also have Neatsu, which is a little unincorporated community in Lincoln County. So from Otis, if you're going west to Lincoln City, you're going to get into Neatsu, but this is really just on Devil's Lake, again, which is really kind of in town. From Neatsu, you can get into Lincoln City just in a couple minutes. So Otis is an area that a lot of people ask about, definitely presents some options, but very much kind of inland, out-of-town living, although, again, there is some development. It's not incredibly rural or isolated in that way. Okay, next we'll talk about Siletz, which is south of Lincoln City, north of Newport, north of Toledo, which we'll talk about here in a moment. Siletz is a little more isolated, but you'll see it is a small little town. So there's this 229 corridor here kind of up through the hills. And then you can see, Siletz is relatively developed, has, kind of the Main Street small town feel up here, but you're still going to be pretty close to the ocean, pretty close to Lincoln City, pretty close to Newport in this Siletz area. Again, all of these are going to be small town, rural living, but not, again, completely isolated like you're in the middle of nowhere and don't have a community and don't have neighbors. So if we look at Siletz, a little bit of an idea of what you're seeing aesthetically. I guess you can get some blueberries up there. So up on the Siletz River. I guess this is just a photo shoot that these folks had on the dock here, but you can see how wooded it is, really kind of up in that coastal range. And actually, we didn't take a look at photos of Otis, so we can do that here. So as you break through the trees, it starts to open up a little bit as you get a little bit closer to town, but you can see how it's kind of rolling hills, some elevation, and you're up really in a pretty wooded area. I guess that's all we're going to get for Otis. All right. Now, Toledo is an area that a lot of people ask about. One of the more direct shots for an inland town to a coastal community, and especially to a coastal community like Newport, you know, that's a very busy, popular area, one of the more populated towns on the Oregon coast. I mean, Otis is to Lincoln City as much as Toledo is to Newport here, but Toledo's a little bit of a bigger town, a little more established, and it's right here on the Yaquina River, which feeds into the Yaquina Bay here. You know, beautiful scenic area in Newport. And if you look at Toledo, you know, there's a mill there, pretty densely populated, has a cool little main street. Again, yeah, I mean, you can see you have the Yaquina River right there in town. Let's see if we can get at least some pictures of the downtown Main Street area. Someone took a nice 360-degree photo. That's cool. You see the mill there, and then you have Main Street right here, and then you have some residential development up here, and then kind of up in these hills too. So it's really a beautiful area. And in Toledo, you know, you're not just, I think, 7 miles, you know, maybe 10 minutes at most to Newport. You're also only about 45-50 minutes to Corvallis. You get into Philomath and Corvallis, where Oregon State University is. There's about 75,000 people who live here, so pretty big populated area, you know, relative to Toledo. So if you needed to get into this area to do some shopping, whatever it may be, that's going to be pretty accessible as well. So again, you know, this is an area that is pretty popular for folks who want to maybe live a little bit inland but still near the ocean. And we started running out of options here pretty quick. So we were just up here in Toledo. I mean, along this Highway 34 corridor, I mean, not a lot going on. You can see like in LC, a little bit here. That's quite a ways inland compared to some of the communities that we're looking at. You have this Tidewater. I mean, it's just kind of riverfront living here. And then again, you have Waldport. Next, we're looking at Mapleton, which is going to be a pretty rural feel, quite a ways out of town, you know, 15 minutes or so from Florence. And this is along the 126 corridor, which will take you to Eugene. And, you know, between Eugene and Springfield, there's a couple 100,000 people here. So this is a really pretty populated area. University of Oregon is here. So I know a lot of people like to live in Florence because they have quick and easy access to Eugene for medical care. There's an airport there, a regional airport, where you can, you know, get a lot of flights in this area. So Florence is a pretty popular area because of that. Now, if you wanted to be, you know, in the Florence area, a lot of people do opt for lakefront living in like Dune City or up north, where really already, you know, just being east of the highway in Florence, you have kind of an inland feel, a little bit of a different climate even. But if you wanted to follow 126 out to like Mapleton, for example, it's going to be a little bit more rural, but still pretty quick, easy access to town, that much closer to Eugene. You know, you're on the Siletz River here. Let's see if we can get some good photos. Not a ton going on. But it's beautiful in here, and, you know, not unlike like an Otis or Siletz, where you're back up in the trees and rolling hills, and you kind of have this very narrow valley for the Siletz River here. So nice scenic area, pretty close to town, you know, being close to Florence here. All right, again, starting to get really kind of spread out. We were just looking at Florence and Mapleton. Work our way south. Next town south is Reedsport. You do have like Elkton, but, you know, just like LC, quite a ways in. So I don't know if that really kind of falls under what we're looking at. You know, there are some options up in here, Scottsburg, Elkton. I don't know, you know, these are a little bit further than the criteria that I'm using, again, being like 5, 10, maybe 15 miles out from town. It's not until you get down to Coos Bay, which you can see kind of like Tillamook and Astoria, not on this coastline. It's really, you're on this body of water here, Coos Bay. So a beautiful scenic area in its own right, and considered to be coastal communities given the proximity to the ocean. If you go just south of town here down this Highway 42, it's about 20 minutes, 12, 15 miles, something like that. So definitely a ways out of town. Some of the options we've looked at are closer than Coquille, but Coquille is a town that a lot of people ask about. A lot of people that are interested in this Coos Bay, North Bend area look at Coquille as a viable option. And you can see, pretty densely populated, has a downtown Main Street area right here. You're right on the Coquille River. So a lot of similarities here, from a lot of the other towns that we've looked at. You have some residential development up on the north side of town, and then more in town, close to downtown here. If you're in here, you can pretty much walk to downtown, so that's kind of cool. And then you have this big open valley where a lot of the rivers that the towns are on up north, you have more narrow valleys, and you're much more up in the coastal range. Coquille has this really scenic river valley here, which is pretty cool. Let's see if we can get some pictures of Coquille. You can see the water, and you can kind of see this valley here, how that looks, just on the horizon. Again, just unique landscape. It's really beautiful. You have this old city hall building in town. We're just kind of at the mercy of what other people have posted here today. Let's see, we have some videos. Okay, cool. Yep, this is in town, downtown Coquille. So again, if Coos Bay, North Bend were an option, Coquille is not that much farther. And from Coquille, you don't have to get north then to get over to this Cape Arago Highway here, which has some very beautiful beaches, really scenic areas. And here, you can actually get over to Bandon in about 15, 20 minutes, probably closer to 25 minutes actually, but from Coquille, just because you're winding along the river here along this road. Now, Myrtle Point could also be an option if you didn't mind being that much further. Myrtle Point, pretty similar aesthetically and in terms of size to Coquille, but it's not much further away. But it's I don't know what that is. Similar aesthetic, similar landscape, very kind of idyllic little small town. We're not seeing much here, are we? But you kind of get the idea where you are, again, kind of in this river valley, a little bit of a wider valley, but you have a lot of trees, and dense wooded areas nearby. You got this coastal range all through here. And then from Coquille and Myrtle Point, if you take Highway 42 east, you're going to get over into Roseburg. So this is kind of the next most populated town along this I-5 corridor, kind of due east of Coquille and Coos Bay for that matter. Roseburg, I don't know, probably has about 30,000, 40,000 people. You can see it's a decent-sized town and community here, but it's going to be a much smaller town, much less populated area than like a Eugene, Corvallis, Salem, and obviously Portland. When we're looking at kind of the relative population as far as what you can get to going east from any given coastal community on the Oregon coast. So I may have left some places out, but that's really going to be it. If we're looking at Coquille, Myrtle Point, inland from Bandon and Coos Bay, we start to get south here. You can see Langlois and Denmark, a little bit inland here, as far as like the highway breaking off from the coastline a little bit. So you have a little more of an inland feel here, but you're right on Highway 101. So I'm just not going to count it for the sake of the criteria we're using for this video. And you can see how rural and undeveloped it is now inland from Port Orford, from Gold Beach. You do have the Rogue River coming in from Gold Beach, and you do have some residential development up the river a little bit. So there are some options there, definitely. And then down into Brookings Harbor, again, you might have some riverfront living, but not really going to be, any towns or established communities necessarily like some of the options we see up north. So if we look at this as a whole, and if we look at the Highway 101 corridor on the coastline in Oregon, again, relative to the I-5 corridor and Western Oregon, where the majority of people in Oregon live, and within that, some of the inland communities from some of the coastal communities on the Oregon coast, few and far between. Again, Napa, Svensson, this area out of Astoria. We have all the way south of Tillamook, where 101 breaks off quite a ways from the Coast Range. We have Beaver, Hebo, and Cloverdale. These areas in here, close to Pacific City. We get down into Otis, Rose Lodge, outside of Lincoln City, outside of Newport, Siletz, Toledo, outside of Waldport. Again, maybe Alsea in here along the Alsea River here. Then you get to Florence. You get over into Mapleton. If we look at Reedsport, again, Scottsburg, Elkton, a little bit further away to really be considered an inland coastal community, but not too far. And then you get down into Coos Bay and Bandon, where you have Coquille, Myrtle Point, inland a little bit along the Coquille River. And that's going to be it. So if you are thinking about moving to the Oregon coast, and if you are considering an inland community, and you want just that, a community where there actually is people around and some residential development, maybe a downtown area, a main street, you're not going to have that many options. Now, if you are looking to move close to the Oregon coast, but be a little bit inland and have a lot of privacy, maybe a lot of land, a little bit of seclusion, a little bit of isolation, some people are looking for that. There's going to be more options for you. There's for sure things that we can talk about as far as what those options look like. And if you are looking for a community that isn't right on the beach, right on the ocean, maybe more up in a wooded area, for example, if any of these communities look interesting to you, give us a call, send us a text, shoot us an email, or click the link down below in the description of the video, schedule a Zoom call with us, and we can talk more about exactly what you're looking for. If this video is helpful, make sure to hit the like button. That helps us out a lot. If you want to get more videos like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tap the little bell to get notified every time we drop a new video. As always, we really appreciate you watching. Until next time, we'll talk to you later.